Hi, I'm David Moskowitz with PropThink, and we're here with the CEO of Ventrus Biosciences, Russell Ellison. Dr. Ellison, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Dave.
So tell us about Ventrus, what you guys do, and what opportunities the company is pursuing currently.
So what we are is a specialty pharma company focused entirely on gastrointestinal disorders, actually on anal rectal disorders. This is sort of a untapped area, not many people working there. I think the GI community started at the top, and they've been working towards the bottom. And so we're focused on this, and there's not a lot of activity, but there's a lot of unmet medical need. And we have two products. One is reasonably not that far from filing an NDA, and therefore not that far from the market. And we have another one which needs phase 2B. And the first one, the lead, is VEN-307, or diltiazem, which is the old cardizem, a calcium channel blocker, that is applied in a cream to relieve the pain of anal fissures. Anal fissures is an incredibly painful condition. It's basically a tear in the anal canal, and it's absolutely agonizing for people that have had it for longer than 2 weeks. And the cause is really elevated sphincter tone, and diltiazem actually, if you apply it topically, will relax the sphincter and relieve the pain and probably promote healing. The other product is topical phenylephrine, common cough and cold preparation, applied topically for fecal incontinence because it actually causes constriction of the sphincter. And the indication we're looking at it is an orphan indication for people who have ulcerative colitis and get their colons removed. And when that happens, the surgeon will attach the small bowel in a pouch to the anal canal. And during that surgery, you can get neuromuscular damage to the sphincter and then get fecal incontinence afterwards. It's thought there's about a 30% incontinence rate after this surgery, which is a problem for these patients because they're usually in their 20s. And, this is going to go on for a long time. So we think a topical product that should be fairly benign should have a pretty good success. There's about 100,000 of those patients out there. They're concentrated in 40 colorectal surgery centers, so they're easy to get to commercially. And it'll be a long-term treatment. So we're excited about that one too. We think that's a big unmet need. And but the one that we're really focused on now is 307 for anal fissures because it's the closest to market.
So let's direct this interview on VEN-307, or the product for anal fissures, or diltiazem cream. So you guys had reported a very successful phase 3 trial, successful results. Can we talk about those results and the program, and what gives you confidence that the product is going to succeed clinically in the final phase 3 trial and succeed commercially?
Right. So this was a pain study, okay, and that's why the drug is reviewed by the analgesic division at FDA, because the indication is treatment of the pain of chronic anal fissures. Pain studies are hard to do, as everybody knows, and one of the big problems with pain studies is dropout rates, how to handle missing data. And the prior product that was studied, which was topical nitroglycerin, now marketed as Rectiv, had a lot of problems because people get terrible headaches, and they drop out because of the headaches, even if they're improving. And what you do in those cases is you have to carry forward the baseline or the worst observation, which then is a bias against treatment if you have side effects. The good news for our product is that there are very few incremental side effects, particularly headaches and cardiovascular events. And the reason is because the exposure in the body is very, very low. It's less than 7% of the minimum therapeutic concentration that you would have if you were taking the product orally for hypertension. So we had very few dropouts. And that meant that we could actually show some pretty remarkable results. I mean, results that really haven't been shown together in a single multi-center anal fissure trial before. That was, we showed a significant improvement in pain on defecation, which is the pain everybody has, and it's the worst pain you get from anal fissure. Average daily pain, which is the endpoint that Rectiv had, and healing, which has almost never been shown in a multi-center trial. So that was kind of the trifecta of anal fissure endpoints. And so we were very excited about that. And So that was a 465 patient study. We looked at 2 doses versus placebo. We looked at a 2% concentration and a 4% concentration. And it turned out there was very little daylight between, so in terms of efficacy, and none in terms of adverse events. So we decided to go with 2% 3 times a day as our final dose.
What specific data in the phase 3 trial were really compelling in your view?
Well, for me, it was pain on defecation, because that's what is so horrible about that condition. It's awful. And people, they'll even go into surgery to get rid of it. And the surgery is a problem because it's permanent relaxation of the sphincter. And if you go too far, you can get incontinence that's also permanent. So, and that's about a 10% rate. Now, there isn't a surgeon you can talk to that will admit to having that rate, but it's out there.
So being able to resolve the problems of anal fissures without the headache complications that you see with the current product in the market, is that exciting to doctors?
Yeah, well, the colorectal surgeons who treat this are really excited about it. Most of them use compounded diltiazem already. That's ground up in the pharmacy, mixed with the cream, and dispensed to the patient.
So let me just stop you there. So what you're saying is your product, which is diltiazem in a cream form, is already being used on the market where physicians prescribe it and it gets made up in a pharmacy?
Right. So they write a recipe, and the pharmacist mixes generic diltiazem tablets up with a cream, grinds it up, mixes it in a cream, and dispenses it. The problem with that is it's very hard to get that right, because the key is grinding it fine enough, because the drug actually goes into solution in a cream, and then mixing it enough so you get consistent concentrations throughout the whole preparation. And we completed a survey actually in New York of compounding, and it's pretty terrifying. I mean, there's a couple of pharmacies, and if you give me $5, I'll tell you which ones they are, that actually do this well. But there were 10 that did it very badly. And what was really concerning was if you get a big tub of this and you sample it in 4 different places, you'll get a different concentration in every place. That means the pharmacist just couldn't get the mixing well enough, because most of the creams are pretty viscous and they're very hard to mix unless you have an industrial mixing machine. And the other thing is that refills were inconsistent concentration to the original prescription. So people, what's remarkable to me is most physicians are very happy with the results they're getting. And given the inconstancy of the preparation that's being applied, that really tells you there's probably, gives me reasonable comfort of efficacy of a consistent product.
So you think because the product is being used already by physicians, you basically have a ready market for this?
Yeah, I mean, people worry about, can you replace compounding? And the competitive profile of an FDA-approved, good manufacturing practice produced product is severalfold. First of all, people who get compounded diltiazem have to pay for it. And what we saw in New York was people were paying between $80 to $200 for a 2-month supply. And they get no help from managed care on that. Except maybe managed care will pay for the generic diltiazem, but that's, a very tiny portion of the cost. So that's one thing. And, if there's a copay for managed care, we can give out copay coupons and get the copay down to a very low level. The second thing is that the doctor has to write a recipe. It's not an ordinary script. And so this is a simple script pad situation. It's easy to do. The third issue is it's hard to find compounding pharmacies in many places. There are about 15 or 16 in New York. There's maybe 80 in Miami. But in much of the United States, people would have to drive 100, 200 miles. Or they'd have to go to a teaching hospital, and the surgeon would have to bend some arms to get the thing made. So in this case, this would be widely available, no problem. And then lastly is once you expose doctors to the inconstancy of compounding, I think they kind of get the message. Why wouldn't you write something that's A, approved, and B, you can rely on it? As far as them adopting this, because most of them are already writing diltiazem anyway, that we're not worried about. This has been a problem for nitroglycerin because that train's moved on for the last 10 years. since nitro was first used. And since then, people have switched to calcium channel blockers because of the headache problem.
So it's my understanding that when you do talk to compounding pharmacies, if a drug is approved at a particular strength, the compounding pharmacy is prohibited from dispensing that strength once a FDA-approved version is on the market. Is that true?
That's true, but it's not enforced. There's really nobody around to enforce it. The problem is that would be the state pharmacy board that would have to enforce that. I think this becomes important for regional compounding. So when you go online, if you type in diltiazem cream, you can find a lot of online pharmacies based all over the United States that can ship you this. And those are the guys that get into problems because they're crossing state lines. And that now becomes a federal jurisdiction. But your local pharmacy, really the state pharmacy board would have to want to enforce that. And they're pretty reluctant. I think it might be the case in, let's say, a city like Miami where you got 90 compounding pharmacies, that they might do something, make an example of somebody. But New York, I would be surprised. Other places, I would be surprised. I think the pharmacy boards are being cautious about that. Honestly, our commercial strategy does not require their intervention, okay? We believe that, given that most of the patients are concentrated amongst 1,500 colorectal surgeons, which are easy to reach for reps, they haven't been over-detailed, so reps can get in, particularly with a copay coupon. We think that, you know, the competitive profile against compounded version is, you know, pretty good.
Back to the phase 3 clinical data that you have in hand, the successful trial. When will we see a publication on that?
Well, so the colorectal surgery meetings, which is where you want to put this, are generally in the fall, okay? We don't think a publication in advance of that would make that a problem, getting that presented, accepted. But we do want to publish in a colorectal surgery journal, and they have long lead times, but we do intend to publish. So they may come out around the same time.
I believe the company was set to meet with the FDA after the summer. Have you met with the agency? And if so, what has been the result of this?
Yeah, we did, just before Labor Day weekend. And we had a good meeting. It was very clear. It was a really good discussion. But my philosophy is, no matter what I think was agreed in the room, I don't know what was agreed until I get the minutes. So when we get the minutes, we'll discuss with the market what happened. So that'd be probably early October.
So the company has one phase 3 trial that succeeded in hand. Do you think that Ventrus is going to need to run a second phase 3 trial?
Well, we've always guided that we would run a second one anyway, right? Because I don't want to be sitting there with a complete response letter and have to wait another 2 years. So we think we have the money to do it. We think it's a very good hedge. So in any event, no matter whether we think we can file with one study or not, it makes sense to do the second one. So we'll be launching that probably end of October, early November.
But at the same time, you still are planning to go forward with a second phase 3 trial?
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be sure. I mean, the strategy of filing on one, if you imagine that you're going to have to provide them the second one ultimately, saved us maybe 4 months to market. It gave us a July 2014 PDUFA date at the end of the day versus an October, November one. Because if we file on 2 studies, then we'll file at the end of 2013 or very early 2014. So it was a way to maybe compress the timelines a little bit in terms of getting to market, but either way, we'll still be launching in 2014.
Strong results from the phase 3 trial that you've seen. Did they give you any learnings? Did you get anything out of that trial that will help you design the second phase 3 trial for even better results?
That's a very good point. I mean, on the one hand, if something's successful, you should try to replicate it as closely as possible. On the other hand, it could have been more successful. The data could have been more robust. The delta between the drug and placebo could have been bigger, and we were able to mine all that data with our partner to find out what tweaks we could do to enhance the possibility or the probability that the difference between active and placebo would be larger. So we found a couple of little tricks in there. And the other thing is we're making each arm larger. So this isn't absolutely necessary because we already had a good p-value, but it's to take care of these unknown contingencies that can sometimes happen in a trial. Right? So the other trial was 155 per arm. This is 200 per arm. And there's a few other tweaks there that we're doing, learning from that one.
Patients in the phase 3 trial that you've reported were able to take analgesics, pain relievers, if they needed it for their pain of anal fissures.
Right.
Did that affect the results in your view when you look at the data?
Well, first of all, if you look at just total analgesia use, no difference between the treatments. So if you look at analgesia use for anal pain, there was significantly less for the 2%. So the 2% performed very well, even though there was less analgesic on board for anal pain than the placebo. So that was actually a very good strategy because we think it really reduced dropouts. Right? So, and it's what the Rective study did, the last one that they got approved on, which is the right way to go.
Russell, based on your market research, how big do you think the market for Ven 307 could be in the anal fissures treatment area?
Well, we think, given that the price point has been established, our reference price has been established by Aptalis. Well, so Aptalis has launched Rective, which is topical nitroglycerin, in March of this year. Okay, and they set a wholesale acquisition price of $365 for a month's supply. The physicians that we talk to will routinely treat for 2 months when they use diltiazem because they don't have the headache liability, etc. So that's about $730 for a 2 months course. And, we think there's 700,000 patients out there. And our estimate is that about 500,000 are concentrated amongst 1,500 colorectal surgeons. So this is incredibly productive for commercialization. And we also think, as I said, the majority of them are already using compounded diltiazem. So I'm switching to a much better, easier, and financially supported at the patient level preparation of something they're already using. So I'm kind of walking into an open door, as the Swiss would say. So we're pretty excited about that, and the math works out pretty well. The best thing about the math is, if that is in fact the situation, we're going to be spinning out a lot of free cash flow starting in the second year, which allows us to do many other things. Now, we're launching a major market research study with Princeton Brand Econometrics, who are very well known in the pharmaceutical industry for forecasting. They're going to look at 800 physicians with a big focus on colorectal surgeons, so we can understand the whole buying process, how patients first get diagnosed, where they go, where they end up, and what the colorectal surgeons are willing to do. So we're going to test the switch from compounded to this to see if our assumptions are correct. We're going to test the current use of diltiazem, which is important, and how competitive we are against other compounded calcium channel blockers and against the nitroglycerin.
Very good. And when should we expect to see results from that?
Probably towards the end of October.
That sounds like an exciting piece of information.
We think that's a very important piece of information for the company because not much is known about the anal fissure market because there's no IMS data, because it's all compounded and you can't really get at that. And the epidemiology has been very poor. People don't really ask colorectal surgeons too much about drugs, so there isn't much known. So we think this will be very, very important to test our assumptions about the commercial potential about this product.
Just wrapping up with some questions about financials and the stock itself. Let's talk a little bit about the balance sheet. Do you guys have the capital to get to significant value-creating milestones for investors?
Yeah, we believe we have the capital to get to an approval of Ven 307, even if we have to file with 2 trials at the end of the year, which would give us a PDUFA around October or so.
So you're saying you can fund the trial, the second phase 3 trial,
right,
should you need it, and then you can bring it through the NDA process to approval with the capital on the balance sheet.
That's correct. And, we're a pretty virtual company. We've kept it that way. So our G&A burn is actually very small. So just about 80% of what we spend on the asset directly. Right? So That was quite good. We did a very large raise in July of 2011, and we raised about $47 million net, and we took down part of an ATM after the anal fissure data was announced, so we raised a little more capital. And at the end of the last quarter in June, that gave us $29 million, which our estimates are should be sufficient to get to approval.
So you're a phase 3 company with one positive trial, another asset in phase 2, and no need to raise capital to get to your next major milestone. Yet the valuation of the company is very, very low at this point. The enterprise value is in the tens of millions of dollars. Are you disappointed with that stock price, and what can you tell investors about?
Well, sure we are. There was a major hedge fund that started buying hand over fist when, the stock got to these levels, because their estimate was the multiple, given the commercial potential at these levels, is like you're talking venture multiples. So they saw this as a great opportunity. So on the one hand, there are, assuming all goes well, there are very reasonable multiples out there for this at these levels. So on the other hand, I think some people are waiting to validate the market. I mean, the sell-side analysts have been talking about 200 million peak sales. Somebody went higher than that. The lowest estimate, I think, is 75. But it's fascinating to me to look at other companies that have that kind of potential, and their valuations are arguably higher. So it's difficult to determine what forces are keeping us where we are. I have the feeling that the most important thing will be this confirmation of our commercial assessment of the product, particularly the concentration of patients at colorectal surgeons, because that allows a very small field force to optimally commercialize this, which means that you can start spinning off a lot of free cash flow very quickly.
So I guess one final question. With an enterprise value that's so low, capital in the bank to essentially self-fund this phase 3 program, one phase 3 trial in hand that's successful, are there potential suitors out there that are looking at you guys to buy out?
Well, I've been on the buy side for a lot of my career. I worked for big pharma. And, for them, what's the rush, right? If we have the commercial potentials demonstrated, we run the second trial, we get approval, this thing will be a couple $100 million more, which is really not a big deal for most, right? And yet, they've taken almost all the risk off the table. Right? So I would think that the time that might start getting interesting would be when we finish the second phase 3, and it's pretty clear that, this drug's going to get approved. Right?
Makes sense.
On the first round. So, one of the things about the FDA meeting, apart from the major question, can I file with one study, there was a lot of clarity about absolutely everything that had to be in that NDA, so we could avoid a CRL, right? And so I think that's when that's going to get interesting. And if you think we could spin off, a lot of cash flow at starting in year 2, the multiples on that are interesting, right? You're buying cash flow. The accretive nature of that kind of transaction would be interesting, I think, for a fair number of companies. I mean, this doesn't move the needle for big pharma, obviously, but if you had a GI portfolio already, it's pretty cool. Right? So, and then there's companies that do focus on GI, and so we think they would certainly have potential here. Having said that, because of the concentration of patients with colorectal surgeons, this is a no-brainer for a small company to launch. And honestly, I think demonstrating the sales and the free cash flow makes this even more valuable, right? Then there's very little risk, and there should be very little discount in any kind of transaction.
Great. So we're looking forward to more on the FDA meeting that you've had, certainly after you get the minutes. more about the market research for anal fissures in the fall, and then, of course, the second phase 3 program should you guys put that into action. So, Dr. Ellison, thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing more about Ventrus as the quarters roll on.
Thanks a lot, Dave.